Super. So I am going to speak to you about protecting intellectual property, your brands and your inventions in North Africa. And you know, generally we're talking here about Africa. And so I would like to just briefly look at Africa and why Africa is really so important. So Africa, as you probably know, has a compound growth rate since 2010 of approximately 3.9% every year. So that's you know, quite a significant growth rate. Of course, you're going to say to me, you know, they're coming from very low, but you know, still there is huge growth in these African markets. And if you look at certain specific African markets, they're even outperforming. And clearly, Africa is outperforming the global average. That is also reflected in the fact that there is a young urbanized middle class that is coming up in Europe, so young people that live in cities and that earn good money and that like to spend their money on quality branded products, because you know, in Africa there is also a lot of substandard products. So when these young urban middle class people spend their money, they like to spend it also on quality products, and they are therefore, let's say, brand savvy. And that is reflected in the consumer expenditure in Africa, which is, was in 2015 1.4 trillion, and it is expected to rise in 2030 2.5 trillion. Okay, all of this explains why, for example, 70% of the 50 largest fast-moving consumer goods companies are present in Africa, because they want to tap into this potential of young consumers that like to spend their money, you know, on brands. Of course, we also have a problem with counterfeiting in Africa. Counterfeiting is a problem everywhere, but probably it's worse in Africa. Why? Because there's probably less enforcement effort going on there. And so, for example, if you look at counterfeit medicine and the statistics of the World Health Organization, you will see that more than 50% of the cases of counterfeit medicine recorded worldwide do occur in Africa. And in my daily practice, I see horrible things when it comes to counterfeit medicine. For example, we have cancer therapy that does not contain any active elements, active ingredients, so you buy medicine, but it doesn't help. And the worst thing I have seen is a snake bite anti-venom. So you're bitten by a snake and you need an antidote, but the counterfeit snakebite antivenom does not contain the antidote. So actually you die. So, you know, and this is a reality in Africa. The same when it comes to creative content. Creative content is something that is highly pirated. For example, there's a figure out there in Algeria, creative content, computer programs and the like. There's a piracy figure of estimated 60% in Algeria. So, you know, these are really high figures. Well, we, coming back to why it's important, Africa, for companies, is also because, you know, in Africa, the margins are relatively high. They are, let's say, difficult markets to enter for a company, and that's why, of course, there is things like a help desk that, you know, accompanies you when you are entering these markets, and you have to be a little bit of an adventurer, if I may say so, to enter these African markets. But once you're in there, once you're established there, the margins that you can make in Africa are much higher than those that you can make in Europe, because, you know, there's less fierce, let's say, competition. That is about to change, but voila. So then we are going to speak today about, and let me turn the slide, about countries in North Africa. We'll dig into all of them in detail. What makes these countries so special? Well, what makes them special is, and what unites them all, if I may say so, is that they are mainly countries where Arabic is spoken, Arabic plus other languages, and in many instances English or French will be spoken as well, sometimes in court, sometimes in government. I'll go into detail here, but you know, the common factor that they have is, of course, that they are Arabic speaking languages, and the countries have often a mix of, let's say, civil law, which is mixed with some Islamic law. We'll see that in detail. Now, I have already said IP infringements, so intellectual property right infringements, counterfeiting and piracy are a problem in these countries. They are a problem locally, so they are a problem for the local consumers, but they are also a problem for the European Union and for consumers in the European Union, because from these countries, if you look at the statistics of counterfeits entering into the European Union, you will see that from these countries you have a large number of counterfeit products coming into the European Union. Okay, so I will go in detail concerning all of these countries. Now, the first point that I would like to briefly look at is how can you register your intellectual property rights in these North African countries. I'm going to make a distinction between how to go about for patents and how to go about for trademarks. Who is interested in patents here? Who's more interested in trademarks? Can we do a little show of hands? Who's really interested in patent law here? Nobody. You. Great. So I'm going to speak for you. Trademarks, is more interest for trademarks, hopefully? Yeah? Okay. So great. So I'll go into more details there. So patents, just briefly then, patent protection, of course, is available in all these North African countries, and you have the choice between three routes, actually, as a company. You can apply for your patent nationally. So meaning that when you file your patent application, you can go to the national IP office and file the patent application there. Oftentimes that's not what is happening, except if you are a company that's active in these countries. Oftentimes you will make use of international instruments that facilitate the patent application, and one of them is the so-called PCT, Patent Cooperation Treaty. This is a simplified application mechanism for patents through the WIPO, so the World Intellectual Property Organization, one single filing, which goes then to the different PCT member states, who can then examine and grant the patent rights. And the good news is that all these North African countries about whom we will be speaking today are part of this patent cooperation treaty, so you can designate them there. The only exception is Libya. I will be speaking about Libya. Libya, as you know, is a country with quite some unrest, and so therefore it's no longer possible to file PCT applications in practice in Libya, unfortunately. But we'll see that they have other problems as well. And then, interestingly enough, those companies of you who are present here who have a European patent, it's interesting for you to know that if you file a European patent in Morocco and Tunisia before certain dates, 2015 for Morocco, 2017 for Tunisia, after certain dates, then you get valid protection through your European patent in these countries. So that's good news. Now, trademarks. How can you protect your trademark in North Africa? The same thing applies. So either you go nationally or you go through an international instrument which is called the Madrid Agreement. Now, nationally, what does it mean? If you want to have, let's say, trademark protection in Algeria, then you can opt for filing an application with the Algerian IP office, the INAPI, Institut National Algérien de la Propriété Intellectuelle, and then there you follow the national procedure. What's the, let's say, disadvantage? The disadvantage is if you file trademark applications in all these North African countries, you're going to have different filing dates. You have to have a local agent in all these countries, so that makes it more complicated, more costly, and so that's why many companies will actually prefer to use an international instrument, which is the so-called Madrid Agreement and Madrid Protocol, which is again a simplified system for filing one single application through WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, designating all these countries. The trademark application is then transferred by WIPO to the different IP offices, who have a term, depending on what treaty they have signed up, a term of between 12 and 18 months to examine and to eventually refuse your trademark application. Past this deadline, your trademark rights are registered and they are equivalent to national rights in these countries. So they can be enforced just like national trademark rights. So that's actually, in practice, the route that international companies are going. Now, I have been asked to say a few words on Libya. Is there a company here who's active in Libya? I would be interested. Who is daring to? Nobody, hey? Okay. Yeah, Libya is undergoing, as you know, severe civil unrest. There's, I think, 2 governments there that are, kind of engaged in war between each other. So that makes, let's say, intellectual property issues less of a priority in this country, as you can imagine. As a result of that, the IP office there does accept patent cooperation treaty applications, but the law has not been amended, so it's not exactly sure whether, these applications are actually valid in Libya. Trademark applications by foreign applicants are no longer accepted by the Trademark Office since 1st of November 2022. If you were lucky to file before that date, then you have to be extremely patient when it comes to the examination of your trademark application. We have some that are pending, for years and years, and I think, probably that companies will have to think about renewing their trademark before it's even registered. So it's a bit of a complicated situation there. And it's still possible to file trademarks by companies who own national production or service units. So, it's going to be, extremely complicated. But so, in other words, Libya is probably not the best business environment for the moment, unfortunately, and that probably explains why there's nobody of you present here. Now, Egypt, and I have told you in the beginning, Africa has a large middle class, so I would just like to, share these figures on Egypt with you, because they do explain the importance of the country. So there's now, today, as we speak, 105 million inhabitants. They're expected to be 210 million by the 2080s. 2/5 of this population is urbanized, a very high GDP per capita, second number of ultra-rich people in Africa. So, these people spend money, explains probably the presence of, big fashion, luxury goods companies in Egypt. And as I said, that's probably what is most interesting for companies. 30% of the population are middle class. So these people have, disposable income. And, Egypt is one of the largest and most diversified economies in Middle East and Africa. Egypt, when it comes to the legal system, they have a combination of Sharia law and civil law of French inspiration. So, French legal concepts do apply there. The court architecture is that you have a court of first instance, then you have a court of appeal and a court of cassation. And the good news about Egypt is that they have specialized economic courts, both for civil and criminal proceedings, including for intellectual property matters. So intellectual property matters will, luckily, be heard by specialized court. Now, my colleague here has said that that it's going to be very expedient to treat matters before the courts. Now, I have to, let's say, I have to say to you, unfortunately, not so expedient, because even before these specialized IP courts, cases are adjudicated between 6 to 15 months. So it takes a little bit of time, but at least, the advantage of specialized IP courts or commercial courts is that you have judges who know about intellectual property matters. Egypt is a member of WIPO, the Berne Convention, and the Patent Cooperation Treaty. Now, when it comes to patents, it takes an average of 4 years for a patent application to be granted. Let's say bad news for the right holders, annuities are payable every year from the filing date of the patent application, even if the patent has not been proceeded to registration. And as I already said, enforcement of IP rights is achieved through patent infringement actions that are heard by specialized commercial courts, and in urgent cases, these courts can provide injunctions. Usually in Egypt, the judges will seek, especially in patent matters, which are technical matters, so usually the judges will seek the advice of a technical expert, a technical expert, in order to review and adjudicate the case. So the court will nominate a technical expert to help look at the matter. When you are filing a trademark application nationally, it will take between 1 to 2 years from filing to registration. There is an examination on formal as well as substantive matters. The trademark applications are published in the official gazette, and there is an opposition procedure of 60 days, meaning that third parties who believe that a certain trademark application does infringe on their prior trademark rights can file an opposition, which is an administrative procedure in order to ask for the trademark not to be registered. Now, once you have a trademark, the good news is that you can apply for cooperation with the customs authorities to prevent counterfeit goods from coming into the country. There is no formal customs recordal procedure, but there is an informal procedure whereby you can sign an MOU with the Egyptian Customs Administration in order for them to look for suspicious counterfeit pirated goods when they are imported into Egypt. So that's good news, and that's actually quite important because, as you probably know, many of these counterfeit products come from abroad, so they have to go through the border, and there it's an ideal situation for them to be intercepted by the customs authorities. Okay? Now, I'd like to draw your attention to something very particular which is in place in Egypt. Actually, certain goods that are imported into Egypt have to be mandatorily registered with the General Organization for Export and Import Control, GOIEC, and so there is a mandatory recordal procedure, which means that trademark owners must record the name of the manufacturer as well as their trademark, and the manufacturer must provide a certificate of incorporation, a list of the products, and a certificate of quality. So this is something really quite important to keep in mind, and it applies to a very large number of products, actually. So I listed here all the products. It's food products, but it's also, you know, everyday consumer products. So this is something to absolutely bear in mind before doing business in Egypt. And it reminds me of something similar that exists, by the way, in Kenya. I don't know, I'm jumping a bit to, let's say, the east of Africa. I'm doing a little jump, but Kenya has just this year introduced also a mandatory recordal for all intellectual property rights with the anti-counterfeiting agency. And this is mandatory. There are theoretically severe sanctions on not respecting this mandatory recordal. Certainly it can result in delay of delivery of goods. So, you know, this is something you have to absolutely keep in mind. And yeah, it's probably widely ignored that Egypt is having something very similar in place. So I draw your attention to this here. Okay, so we continue. We travel from Egypt to the other side of Africa. We're going to Morocco. Morocco is a relatively small country compared to Egypt, around 37 million inhabitants, but it's the fifth largest economy, and 66% of the population there are upper or middle class. They have a relatively high GDP per capita, and 64% of the population are urbanized. So this is what I mean when I'm speaking about this middle class that wants to spend their money on, you know, quality and branded products. Now, the languages in Morocco are Arabic and Berber. That are the two languages, but French is widely used in government. So in the government proceedings, it's all in French, but the language of the courts is Arabic. So if you file court papers, they are going to be in Arabic. Morocco has a civil law system which is based on French law, French inspiration, as well as Islamic law, so it's a bit of a hybrid country and legal system. As to the court architecture, they have neighborhood courts, that is the courts of, if I may say so, first instance. So the lowest courts are neighborhood courts. They are run by single and non-professional judges. So, you know, you can see the quality of the decision that when it comes to intellectual property that you can expect from these courts, very complicated. Now, the good news is there's also courts of first instance, court of appeal and cassation courts, and Morocco also has commercial courts which do hear IP matters. So irrespective of the quality of the parties, even if the parties are not commerçants, business people, the IP matters are submitted to specialized commercial courts. That is actually good news. Morocco has signed up for the WIPO, WIPO Treaty, PCT, the Paris Convention, as well as Bern. Now, when it comes to patents, interesting, I have already said that in the introduction, the validation of a European patent can be requested in Morocco. It is then necessary to provide a translation into French or Arabic of the specification of the drawings, and you have to, of course, pay the fees for that, and you have to appoint an agent in Morocco. And once it is granted there, the European patent will have the same protection as one that is granted by the European Patent Office in its member states. So that's quite actually good news for patent owners. Now, when it comes to trademarks, the system goes quite quickly. It takes an average from 6 to 8 months from the filing to the registration. There is examination on formal requirements only, so that means that there is not a very severe examination of trademark applications when it comes to absolute and relative grounds. Absolute grounds are, whether a trademark is descriptive, or deceptive, for example, and relative grounds are the examination of third-party rights. So that does not take place. There is a publication of the trademark application in the official gazette, and there is an opposition procedure of 60 days after publication of the trademark. So that is this administrative procedure which right holders can apply to prevent a trademark application from being registered if it does infringe on prior registered trademark rights. Actually, all over the Maghreb, you're going to see quite a lot of bad faith trademark filings. We do. I don't want to pinpoint any of these countries, but we do have a lot of problems for right holders who run, let's say, a TV show, for example. You can imagine all these TV shows that are quite famous, Big Brother, MasterChef, and the like, and they are, of course, they can be seen in these countries, and there's always then some smart guy, if I may say so, who goes and registers these names of these TV formats. This is typically something that we see quite a lot. We see it all over Africa, but so that is something that in the framework of an opposition proceeding, sometimes one can take action, even if there are unregistered rights, but the trademark is known in the countries. Now, the good news is that when it comes to trademarks, in Morocco there are criminal sanctions for trademark infringements. Actually, the Gendarmerie Royale is quite active, and you can, as a right holder, when you are aware of infringement of your trademark, you can rely on the Gendarmerie Royale and file a complaint with them so that they will then raid the premises of the alleged infringer and see whether indeed counterfeit products are found there. If it's the case, the matter is referred to the public prosecutor for prosecution, and right holders can be partie civile, so they can submit a civil party claim, to get damages further to this criminal investigation and criminal, of course, prosecution leading to a criminal conviction. The good news is there are serious fine jail sentences for infringing on trademark rights in Morocco, including the confiscation and destruction of infringing goods and publication of the decision at the infringer's expenses. So that's actually quite a dissuasive, quite dissuasive measures. Now, when it comes to civil measures, you can request seizure measures before a civil court. So that's what is called in French saisie contrefaçon. So when, as a trademark owner, you become aware of an infringement of your intellectual property rights, you can go unilaterally to a judge who will then examine your request. You have to show that you are prima facie, at first sight, owner of a valid trademark right. You will also have to show that there is a prima facie infringement, so apparent infringement. And then if the judge is convinced, without the adverse party being alerted, the judge will grant unilaterally an order for a bailiff to go to the location where the infringing products are sold, stored, manufactured, whatever, and the bailiff will then use the surprise, go into these premises and write a report. Once that report is written and filed in the court, the right holder has 30 days to introduce a court action to follow up on this. If the right holder doesn't take any action in the 30 days, then this report becomes, invalid. So this is a measure that's, regularly used. We have only last week carried out such a saisie contrefaçon in a shop selling extremely expensive products. I'm not going to go into any details because it's going to be very easy to, it's a small world. Huh? Africa is a very small world. But very expensive luxury products, second-hand, so to say, that were actually counterfeit. So if you can imagine that if you're spending 20,000 euros on a luxury product that you think is a quality product, you're not really happy that they're counterfeit. So we have taken some decisive action there, and it's actually something that does work. So that's the good news. Okay, so if there's no further comments, then we are traveling now to Tunisia. Tunisia is very small compared to the other two countries we've talked about. It's only, if I may say so, 12 million inhabitants. They have a relatively high GDP per capita, and 70% of the population is urbanized. Unfortunately, the economy is under pressure. They have a record high unemployment rate there, and very many also young people that are unemployed. So, in Tunisia, the official language is Arabic. French is generally spoken, so there is a mixed legal system, French civil law and Islamic law, and they do also have, in terms of court architecture, the lowest courts are so-called district courts. Again, there is a single judge there hearing the matters. Then you have a court of first instance, court of appeal, you can appeal certain matters, and court of cassation. There is unfortunately no specialized IP courts in Tunisia, and also, as far as I'm aware, no specialized commercial courts. So that's, a little bit unfortunate because, these matters of intellectual property are technical, and so it is good to have, specialized judges that have some awareness for intellectual property. Now, Tunisia is a member of WIPO, Bern and Paris, and the PCT, Patent Cooperation Treaty. Now, when it comes to patents, it is possible to designate Tunisia with a European patent application. Again, you will have to furnish a translation of the application patent in English, French, or Arabic within 3 months of the publication, and you will have to pay fees to the local office, but then your European patent will have the same legal effects as a national patent in Tunisia. So that's good news for patent owners. When it comes to trademarks, it takes approximately 14 months from the filing to the registration of the trademark. There is an examination on formal as well as substantive requirements. So the local intellectual property office does carry out a proper examination of the trademark, which is actually good news for right holders because it means that, trademarks that are descriptive and the like are refused by the office. There is a publication in the official gazette followed by an opposition period of 2 months. And again, there is the possibility to cooperate with customs, but it is only for very specific shipments. So you cannot go to Tunisian customs and say, I'm the owner of the, let's say, Louis Vuitton trademark, and I would like you to watch every single import of Louis Vuitton bags. No, in Tunisia, you have to pinpoint a particular shipment. So if you have intelligence from an investigator, for example, or if you have other intelligence available, big companies, that's what they do have. They have investigators who trace shipments of counterfeit, big containers of counterfeit goods worldwide, and so they will then be able to pinpoint a certain consignment, and then the customs authorities in Tunisia will be able to take action for this specific suspicious shipment. Now, when it comes to enforcement, it is the Ministry of Commerce that is competent. They have an economic control unit. It's a little bit similar to what you have in the UK trading standards. How does it work in Romania? You also have an economic control unit that's competent here? Maybe not. Well, so anyhow, these they are responsible. They are the economic control unit of the Ministry of Commerce, and they will see if the product is conform to local standards, as well as whether it does not infringe on intellectual property rights. And these brigades, they have the competence to raid stores, carry out seizure of goods, and when the infringement is confirmed, then there are fines as well as imprisonment that is possible. Now, you can take, of course, civil action in front of the courts if your trademark right has been infringed, and you can also take, initiate, or let's say commence criminal action. That is to say, you can file a criminal complaint, and then there's criminal prosecution of the infringement in Tunisia. Okay, we travel to Algeria. 44 million inhabitants. It is the third most important economy of the Middle East and Africa, and they have quite an important GDP as well. Essentially young population. Algeria is a little bit under pressure because of the petrol prices recently, but the official languages in Algeria are Arabic and Berber. French is also widely spoken. In Algeria, you have an IP office, the INAPI, Institut National Algérien de la Propriété Intellectuelle. They are extremely strict when it comes to trademark applications. So examining trademark applications, they are extremely strict. They will very oftentimes issue refusals for prior trademarks, so they do an examination of the trademark application to see whether there are prior trademarks on the record, and this examination is among the strictest in Africa. So if we have problems somewhere in Africa with citation of prior trademark rights, then that will be mainly concentrated in Algeria. Also a particularity of the Algerian system, expired trademarks can be cited against a new trademark application. So that's something that does not exist anywhere else in the world. So you have to, in other words, expect when you file a trademark application in Algeria quite a severe examination. For copyright, the local office is the ONDA, that oversees all copyright matters and related right matters. Now, the legal system in Algeria is based on French law and also on Islamic law, but to a much lesser extent. You have in Algeria the first instance courts. There are tribunals. Then you have the Court of Appeal and Court of Cassation, and Algeria has done several capacity building events for judges in the recent years, whereby the judges there have been trained for intellectual property matters. But still, I have to say, it is in practice really difficult to obtain good decisions in first instance in Algeria, because very often litigation will also have to take place in remote country courts, and probably that the capacity training has not always arrived there. So we had a problem with a luxury watch manufacturer brand and some real estate office that has called its real estate office, real estate agency, after this luxury watch brand. So you can just imagine a real estate agency, for example, called Rolex Real Estate, it is very difficult to go against this kind of thing. Now, Algeria is part of the WIPO, has signed for the Patent Cooperation Treaty, the Paris Convention, the Bern Convention, and also TRIPS. My colleague has just spoken about TRIPS. Now, when it comes to patents, the description of the patent application must be translated into French and Arabic. There is approximately 18 months from the application to the registration of a national patent, and don't ask me why, it takes approximately 30 months for an international patent application, so through the Patent Cooperation Treaty, to be examined. Don't ask me why it takes longer. For foreign applicants, an agent is compulsory. So when it comes to trademarks, I would like to draw your attention as businesses to another particularity of the Algerian system. It is compulsory to register your trademark in Algeria before you start to use it in the country. So there is an obligation for trademarks to be registered before you use them in Algeria. Now, de facto in practice, this is not interpreted that strictly, this obligation. It is in practice oftentimes sufficient that you have a pending trademark application in the country, but we had a problem there. One of our clients asked us because they wanted to launch a new product in Algeria, so they asked us to conduct an availability search in Algeria, and we have done what we always do actually. We have done a search in a private database, so you know there's private databases that are available, including databases that are made available by the EU IPO International Cooperation Projects. There's other private databases that you can access against payment. So we did check in a private database, and we did also do an official trademark search with the INAPI, and INAPI came back and said there's no prior trademark application in Algeria that is a problem. Then we filed the trademark application in Algeria. The client started to use its trademark, and they have very quickly had a market share of over 50% in that particular market. And then INAPI, who had issued a trademark search, said, oh, finally, we refuse your trademark application. So then you have a problem, because it's mandatory to have a trademark registration. Here you have a refused trademark application. So then what did we do? We did file, because we were already on the market with the 50% market share. So then we did file quite a lot of device marks and the like, even a mark for the container of the product with the trademark embroidered in the embossed in the container. And in the end we could convince INAPI to register our trademark and to lift the objection. But by the time we were already quite a famous trademark in Algeria. What actually, and that's probably a recommendation that's valid for all these North African countries, I do recommend companies to register their trademark not only in the Latin alphabet, but also in Arabic. So you make an Arabic transliteration of your brand, and you register as well in Arabic. Trademark applications in Algeria must be filed in French. All documents that are not in French need to be translated. So if you file, for example, on a priority, your priority document is in English or Romanian, you need to translate it into French. There is, as I said already, an examination on formal and substantive grounds, very severe, one of the most severe in all of Africa. There is a publication of the trademark for registration, but there is no opposition procedure. So in all other countries that we spoke about, there's an opposition procedure. I told you this is an official procedure whereby the owner of a prior right or even of unregistered rights can contest the registration of a brand. Well, that does not exist, unfortunately, in Algeria. It is possible to make representations to the office, to INAPI, the Institut National Algérien de la Propriété Intellectuelle, but they're not bound to take these submissions into account. So that is a little bit of a problem, maybe something that one could lobby in the interest of companies to have a proper opposition procedure, which seems to me, one of the TRIPS requirements, but I'm not, don't want to be quoted on that here. Also, a particularity of the Algerian system is that when you renew a trademark, you have to provide proof of use, and you have to swear an affidavit where you state that the trademark has been used the last years. So that's quite important to keep in mind. Now, good news, in Algeria, there is a customs recorder that is available, so you can work as a right holder with the customs authorities. We do have a few recorders valid in Algeria, and customs are following up. We're giving them training, and they are properly following up if they intercept counterfeit goods. Also, good news, there are criminal sanctions for trademark infringements, including prison sentences and fines. There's also civil sanctions, that means damages for IP infringements. The Minister of Commerce, they have a Directorate for Control of Quality and the Repression of Fraud. They are very active in Algeria. They do carry out raids and the like. They can also be called upon when one of your competitors uses a trademark without having a valid registration. We did that just recently. One of our competitors did not only copy our trademark or our client's trademark, but they also commercialize this product without having a trademark application or registration, and as I told you, that is an offense in itself in Algeria. So we have asked the Ministry of Commerce to intervene in that matter, and they're doing that, very expeditiously. So that's good news. There's also a special anti-counterfeiting brigade at the police in Algeria. So that concludes my overview of IP specificities for these North African countries. I would like to share with you 5 tips and tricks from my practice, my long practice in Africa. So, tip number 1, when you do file for your trademark, patent, design, whatever, you need to have an informed registration strategy. We have seen that the registration of a trademark, for example, can take very long, can be a lot of refusals, a lot of problems that you encounter on the way. So you need to, anticipate all of that and file your trademark well in advance to be successful in that given market, okay? We anticipate the length of the procedure. Also, you have to keep in mind that generally speaking in Africa, I'm not pinpointing any of these North African countries, but generally in Africa, consumers are not always literate. Sometimes in North Africa they speak mainly Arabic, so the Latin alphabet will be difficult for them. Sometimes more in sub-Saharan Africa, you have illiterate people. So you need to take that into account, because these people, these consumers, will look at the look and feel of your actual packaging. So when they see a packaging of, let's say, milk powder, they will look at the look and feel of the packaging. And so it is important that you don't only register a word mark, so the Nescafé or whatever, but that you register the look and feel of the actual packaging, because that's what consumers in large parts of the African continent will see. And also, unfortunately, in Africa, you have a lot of, let's say, copycats who try to be smart, and they don't copy your word mark, but they do copy the look and feel of your product. If you have a trademark registration for the look and feel, the get-up of your product, that is certainly an advantage. So these two tricks, take them into account: time and the word mark next to the device mark. Second tip is you should always consider cross-border distribution and trade routes. In Africa, you have a very large informal economy. Yeah? I'm not so much talking again about these North African countries, but generally speaking, in Africa, informal trade is a huge thing. I'll give you an example. The number one economy of Africa is now, who do you think is the number one economy in Africa now? Wrong. Not Botswana. It's a very small country. Wrong. Nigeria. Nigeria is the number one economy in Africa. There are more than 200 million consumers there. They have petrol there. So it's a relatively rich country, although it is a little bit of a, let's say, a chaos. But so the number one economy in Africa is Nigeria. And interestingly, most of the products that are actually sold in Nigeria are not imported through Nigerian ports. And why do you think that is the case? There's two reasons for that. Number one, there is a lot of paperwork and delays in these Nigerian ports, so they are clogged. It takes a long time for products to be, detaxed to enter the country, and there's a relatively high importation tax in Nigeria. And so, as I told you, Africa has a huge informal economy. What is actually happening? Many traders do import the products into Nigeria through neighboring countries, such as, for example, Togo. Actually, Togo Lomé is one of, is actually the biggest port of Nigeria without being in Nigeria. And so products are imported through Togo because it goes quicker, and then transported through the green border into Nigeria. You have to also understand that many of these African countries do not have any fenced borders, something of which Donald Trump has always dreamt, a nice little fence at the border. Well, in Africa, that's impossible, because these borders are so long, they are sometimes in the middle of a rainforest or in the middle of a desert, so it is absolutely impossible to police these borders, and so meaning, trade is in Africa actually very informal. Other example, one of the big countries in Africa that's coming up is Ethiopia, as you know. They have a large manufacturing industry there. Now a lot of garments producers go to Ethiopia because it's quite cheap to produce there. But Ethiopia does not have a port. Ethiopia is actually a landlocked country without access to the sea. And so the port of Ethiopia is Djibouti. All goods that have to be exported, heavy goods that don't go by plane, that have to be exported or imported to Ethiopia, go through Djibouti. So it is important that if you produce products in Ethiopia, that you keep in mind that you also register your trademark in Djibouti, because otherwise you could be blocked by somebody in Djibouti, because the importation through Djibouti could be a trademark infringement there. And the same reasoning, of course, for Togo. If you are interested in the Nigerian market, don't only register your trademark in Nigeria, also think about registration in OAPI, which is, you have an office there. It's 17 French-speaking West African countries that have formed a union for a unified system of trademarks and other intellectual property rights. So also consider filing a trademark at OAPI to protect, imports into Nigeria. Just as an example, if you are thinking of these African countries, you need to keep informal trade in mind and consider it in your registration strategy. I have already told you that registration in these African countries is slow. If you file a trademark in the EU IPO with our friends here, then you do that electronically, you pay online, it's all very easy, transparent, electronic, goes quickly examined, quickly published, and quickly registered. All online, electronic. In most of these African jurisdictions, trademark applications still have to be submitted on paper. So it's a paper process that takes very long. When we're talking, so it takes very long, paper is fragile, all these African countries, you know that, you have every now and then, you have some civil unrest, you have some flooding, you have this and that, and paper, of course, easily disappears. So that is a problem. You have to keep that in mind. Unfortunately, when, I'm exaggerating a bit, but, you have to keep that in mind when you are filing your trademarks. So keep trace of all the paper documents that you file. There is also, unfortunately, in some of these African countries, a lot of corruption, including in the trademark offices. So I had to take over a portfolio of 100 trademarks in Nigeria, and when we had a very close look at these 100 trademarks, it turned out that 25% of them, and some of them our clients were selling for $1 million of products every day in Nigeria. Some of these trademarks were not, properly filed and registered. Why? Because in some countries you have corruption, including in the IP offices. So what has actually happened, and it's not, I can speak about it because it's not a secret. In Nigeria, what has happened is that the economic capital is Lagos. The actual capital is Abuja. So the IP office is in Abuja and the lawyers are in Lagos. So all the commercial lawyers that take trademark filings, they are in Lagos. And that's an hour by plane from Lagos to Abuja. Regularly, by the way, a plane has some difficulties, there's plane crashes and everything. So it's also a dangerous route. And so that explains why these trademark lawyers don't always have an office in Abuja, but sometimes do have a little agent there. And what happened is actually these agents sometimes have shared the application fee with a corrupt officer in the IP office. The application was never filed, but the officer has given an acknowledgement receipt for the trademark application, but the taxes were never paid. And with this acknowledgement receipt, the applicant, let's say, was happy and thought they would have a valid trademark application. When then the applicant did follow up on the process, then the trademark lawyer said, yeah, sorry, it's taking time, backlog, this and that. But actually there was a huge corruption scandal, and a large number of trademarks were never actually filed in Nigeria. Now, I have addressed that probably 10 years ago with the administration there. We have then sent the then director to the EU IPO, where they have a very transparent system. Every document that comes in at the EU IPO is scanned and is put immediately online in their database. So it's very transparent, and that's what they did now, set up in Nigeria, an online filing system. But, just to warn you, as a right holder, you need to be aware of these issues. Another problem is, unfortunately, corrupt, as I have already mentioned it, corrupt lawyers, so corrupt colleagues. We also had a case in OAPI. There was a corrupt trademark lawyer there who did quite a lot of filings there and renewals. and who for 1 year did not actually pay any of the renewal or filing fees that their clients had paid to him, and put it all in his pocket. And then at one stage, the OAP, so the trademark and patent office, woke up and said, hey, there's a problem here. We have so many patents that have expired because the annuities have not been paid. For a patent, every year you have to pay an annuity. And then if it's not paid, patent expires. So, but you know, administrations like the EU IPO, the OAPI, they have a budget. They count on having so and so many valid patents on their register to pay their staff. And so at one stage, the OAPI woke up and said, hey, there's a problem here. We don't have any patent, or we have very few patent renewals only. And so then it came out that this colleague of mine did unfortunately put the money in his pocket. He was then sentenced to a jail sentence, and the OAPI did allow patent owners to pay the annuities retrospectively, very exceptionally. So, you know, you have to follow up on registration procedures. Now, when it comes to enforcement of intellectual property rights, you will sometimes be confronted by unusual requests of enforcement agencies. In some of these African countries, the police or customs or whatever in charge of enforcement will come to you as a right holder. And actually, don't forget, you are perceived as being a rich Western right holder. And they will come to you and say, look, we are very happy to conduct this operation there for you, but we need petrol for our cars because, you know, we don't have petrol. So you have to pay us petrol. Or we don't have enough paper, so you need to pay us paper or whatever. You know, so you have this kind of really funny requests. Sometimes even the authorities say, ooh, it's very unsafe. We need to provide a special squad to accompany us. So go back to our example of Nigeria. You know, the northern part of Nigeria is very unsafe. You know, you have a terrorist organization there, Boko Haram, regularly kidnapping children, people living in villages and the like. So a very, very unsafe area, especially now after the elections in Nigeria. And so if you say to the authorities, okay, I would like to enforce my trademark in the north of Nigeria because there's counterfeit medicines there, then the authorities might come to you and say, hey, we need some support, financial support, because we need armed vehicles, we need, military to accompany us and the like. And of course, as a Western right holder, you know, this is just impossible to do because you have, of course, compliance and, you know, you cannot just like that pay the authorities. So that may, unfortunately, lead to a deadlock situation. So, and I mean, I give an example. We really knew about counterfeit products, medicine and vaccines being distributed through the north of Nigeria to Nigeria, but also Cameroon and neighboring countries. We knew that there was a ring of criminals selling counterfeit medicines and vaccines. And the authorities said, we are ready to help you, but we need financial support. Right holder said, we cannot do it because, you know, compliance reasons. So then this leads to a deadlock situation where the consumer, unfortunately, has to bear the consequences of this thing. Now, what can you do in such a deadlock situation? What I do generally recommend is to engage diplomatic channels, because, and that's what we have recommended to our client, because, of course, there is always a US embassy, there's always a French embassy in all these countries, and very oftentimes these embassies will have an IP attaché or an economic attaché, and these economic attachés will be able to take up the issue with the local authorities, with the local government, and draw their attention to the importance of this. So go back to my example of counterfeit medicines and vaccines in the north of Nigeria. Well, it's then possible, to draw this to the attention of the authorities and say, look, even if this right holder cannot support you financially, we need your support to take action. So I would really always recommend to keep these diplomatic channels open and don't hesitate to engage with them in case you encounter problems when it comes to IP enforcement. So